I feel like I've been making great progress on this cavern under my base. Today we're going to build a big tower down here because why not? Anyways, I've got some great Reddit stories to read today, so let's go ahead and get started. The first story today is from r/scary stories from user Trash Tia. When I was 16, homeless kids were going missing in my town. I know what really happened to them. I won't go into detail why I was thrown out of my house at 16. Financial problems, I came from a poor family. Mom and dad wanted me to get a job, and I wanted to stay in school, so that caused arguments. I also made the mistake of revealing to them an intimate part of myself I should have kept hidden. Look, I won't say being on the street was better, but being away from that toxic environment was like a breath of fresh air. I lived in a pretty big town, and there were a lot of kids living on the streets. I did try and find somewhere at first. I stayed in hotels with my last remaining cash, but then I found myself with the option of eating or starving. I was very stubborn at 16. I hated asking for handouts, and just the idea of asking my school for help felt like losing. I didn't want my friends and teachers to know about my situation, so I dropped school. Again, I was a stupid, stubborn kid. I obviously should have asked for help, but back then, teachers didn't care. Kids in my school were severely bullied, and nothing ever changed. They were there to teach, and that was it. So the thought of telling them I was homeless just wasn't happening. I didn't want their pity. I didn't want their attempt to try to empathize with me when in reality, they did not care. So yes, I ended up on the streets, but there was a community of us. We were all in the same situation, thrown out for the same reasons. Toxic and abusive parents or significant others. So all we had were each other. I've seen homeless kids depicted on TV, movies as scrappy pickpockets, but that's a lie. The kids who I hung with weren't brave enough to pickpocket. If they saw cash, food, anything they wanted hanging around unclaimed, they would snatch it up. The pickpocket thing is just the media glamorizing the idea of being a street kid, turning them into a fun, quirky group of teenage criminals trying to survive. The reality is a lot more depressing. I ended up in a group of kids on the south side of our town. Ben, the leader of our gang, was the latest to disappear. Look, I didn't believe in the child catcher rumors. I thought they were just stories, but it became evident someone was actually kidnapping street kids. I may have come from a toxic house, but I was sheltered. I didn't think things like that existed. I had never even been in the type of situation when they could exist. Kidnapping was like a foreign concept to me. It only happened in movies and cartoons, but then familiar faces I knew started to disappear. Carly, a street performer who was trying to earn enough money to leave town. Jason, the weird kid with the eye patch who tried to steal my phone. These kids weren't friends, but they felt comfortable. They felt like a community, even when I wasn't personally close with them. Carly always smiled at me, offering me fresh donuts some old man handed her in the morning. Jason was always skulking around the music stores, asking for change. Every time I saw him, we talked about things that didn't really matter, but talking to him made me feel less alone. When Jason disappeared, the normalcy I'd gotten used to started to fade. I looked for him, but his familiar purple woolen hat had vanished. Carly was always singing under the bridge every afternoon. I could hear her voice while snoozing in the park entrance. She sounded like an angel. With her gone, I felt colder than usual. I couldn't get warm no matter how many times I rubbed my hands together and stuck them under my coat. I had holes in my socks and shoes, and the freezing chill was creeping into my bones. Carly's disappearance really shook me, especially when, several days later, a guy took her spot with his guitar, screaming out painfully bad reimaginings of pop songs. When Ben vanished, I started taking word of mouth more seriously. "He's been taken by the white van," was the rumor floating around. Apparently, some kid saw Ben getting dragged into a white van. The kid was also known to say BS to get attention, but his claim was actually believable. Ben, Carly, Jason, and the other missing kids were last seen at the homeless shelter. So the place where kids were vanishing wasn't exactly ideal. But it did have hot soup and coffee, as well as a place to charge my phone, so I risked it. The homeless shelter was where most kids hung out every day. I used mostly broken facilities to shower, use the bathroom, and try to make connections with kids who were well known. It was pretty much a survival instinct at this point. If I was going to survive on the streets, I needed people I could count on. I had this constant need to get my name out there, just in case I was one of the missing. But it turns out, not all homeless kids play nice. I won't go into detail, but there were a lot of names I thought I could trust and quickly learned that I couldn't trust anyone. I got my first phone stolen, and then my shoes were snatched while I was sleeping. I was definitely hardened after a while on the streets, so when Charlie came along, I basically told him to go screw himself. All the connections I made just lost me cash, food, and my shit. The worst thing you can be as a street kid is nice. If you want to be left alone, you have to make it very clear. Without Ben's leadership, things went off the handle. I was quickly labeled as a naive bastard who messed with anyone. Most of my spots were compromised, so I had no choice but to once again risk the homeless shelter. My initial plan was to grab food and coffee and make a run for it. I had the town library as a safe spot until 4 p.m., and after 10, the guy who owned the Chinese takeout begrudgingly let me sleep in his doorway. I think he felt sorry for me, but at this point, I was too cold to care about pride. The volunteers in the soup kitchen were my age. I didn't know them, thankfully, but I was eager to get out of there. The food was a nice choice of cold curry or soup. I chose soup and a chunk of stale bread. The coffee was always lukewarm, but it was coffee. I wasn't going to complain. I was trying to eat it as fast as I could without burning my mouth, when a kid I can only describe as the human embodiment of a golden retriever slid next to me, grasping his own bowl of soup. With dark brown hair under his hood and freckled cheeks, not to mention his expensive jacket and shoes, I knew the streets would eat him alive. The kid looked like he'd stepped right out of a perfect suburban home. He had a mommy and a daddy and a perfect life. Lucky him. I was having a hard time taking in his expensive clothes. Yes, his hair was greasy and his clothes were slightly discolored, holes in his gloves, dirt smearing his face, so he was clearly sleeping rough. But this guy was asking to get his branded coat stolen. "Take that off," I said through a mouthful of stale bread. That was all I could say. I didn't want to say hi because hi was an invitation to join me. I was on my third phone and I wasn't taking any chances with this kid. 2 years of messing with the wrong people. I was done. I nodded at his jacket and he looked confused. "Huh? Put it in your backpack, idiot." I was just warning him of my past mistakes. I did have my dad's expensive watch and some shoes I bought with money from a summer job before I left home. I lost both of them because I failed to hide them. Elizabeth and Mary, 2 older girls I thought I could trust, were now the proud owners of my shit. The guy had this docile look on his face, eyes wide like a deer. I had no idea how he had survived this long. If he was sleeping in the shelter, yes, it was safer and warmer, but it also made him a target for kidnapping. "Unless you want to lose it," I added, finishing my soup. The guy continued eating, completely unbothered. "Your jacket," I said directly. I didn't lose my patience much, but this guy was testing me. "Take it off, or you will lose it." After being messed around with by Ben's asshole friends, it felt strangely good to be an asshole back to a total stranger. The kid hesitated before pulling off his jacket and backpack, awkwardly yanking off the jacket and stuffing it inside his bag. Then he sat there shivering, like an idiot, and I gave up and offered him one of my spare sweaters. Street kids usually wanted something in return, and I was waiting for his proposition. Instead, he said, "Thanks," and pulled it on. "I'm Charlie." He introduced himself when I stood to leave, grabbing my own pack. I told him I didn't ask, and that it was nice meeting him. When he followed me, I thought we were just going the same direction, but then I took a turn down an alleyway and his footsteps hesitated, before coming after me. I was all ready to tell him to beat it, but Charlie looked lost. He had this look on his face, like he was trying and failing to look intimidating. This kid didn't look like he was going to steal my stuff while I was sleeping. I didn't officially ask him to join me, it just sort of happened. When I got back to my spot, he dropped his pack and started unrolling his sleeping bag next to mine. I took advantage of his kindness, that innocence that was yet to be drained from him by every stone-cold night that never seemed to end. Midnight and dawn felt like centuries apart, and I was never warm enough. My toes were always numb, my fingers losing all feeling. The worst part was when I didn't have enough to eat, so I started fantasizing. But Charlie never lost that stupid smile, even when he was freezing to death. I told him to grab us food for the night, and he came back with 2 pizza rolls and a can of soda to share. I asked him how he'd gotten them, and he shrugged with a grin. This kid expected me to play along with his cryptic games every time he did something vaguely helpful. I didn't care how he'd gotten them, I was just thankful. I started to see Charlie as less of a nuisance and more of a friend. Charlie was loud and obnoxious and drove me insane with his dreams of getting out of town in his situation, but he made me smile, even in freezing temperatures. He never told me about why he was on the streets. Instead, he always changed the subject back to me. I didn't realize how self-centered I was until I spilled my entire life story to him. And when he opened up about himself, I started talking about myself once again. In a way, I think I saw it like a competition. Oh, your life is bad? Well, this happened to me. I waited for him to get frustrated or angry, but he just listened. He always listened. It was snowing when the 2 of us sat shivering on a wall, our legs dangling. I don't remember whose genius idea it was to sit in sub-zero temperatures, but I remember enjoying the icy breeze on my face. Everything was covered in white. I don't think I should have enjoyed snow. It was extremely easy to freeze to death in these conditions, but it was also snow, and I was still a stupid kid. I like snow. Charlie was, as usual, being his chipper self. He scored us a pack of chips to share, so we were passing it back and forth. My hands were so numb, I couldn't even feel the chips. I just stuffed them in my mouth. Do you believe in angels, Finn? That question caught me off guard. Charlie's gaze was glued to a little girl perfecting a snow angel in front of us. The answer was no. I didn't believe in God, any gods, any religion. If God existed, or the angels, my parents wouldn't have kicked me out for liking guys. In the earlier days, I prayed for help. I had the stupid idea that my mom would actually hunt me down and take me back home, but God didn't exist, at least not to me, and I was tired of pretending. I didn't respond to Charlie, and his head dropped onto my shoulder. I jerked back, swallowing a hiss. I shoved him away, and for the first time since I'd met him, his smile started to fade. Sorry, he muttered, rubbing his hands together. Charlie seemed to notice our proximity, shuffling away from me. He said I was warm, and I hated myself for shouting at him, because he was warm too. I liked the feeling of his head on my shoulder. He felt safe and warm and the closest thing I had to a home. I jumped off the wall, making an excuse to distance myself. I think I told him I was going to the shelter to try and find warm clothes from the lost and found. Charlie didn't reply, only jerking his head in a nod. He told me he'd be right here when I got back, and his words settled my twisting gut, the growing lump in my throat. I used my time away from him to come to terms with my feelings, and instead of pushing them away, like I had done for so long, suppressing and swallowing them down, I realized I wanted Charlie to stay with me. Charlie was home. I'd barely known this kid for a few months, and yet with him, I didn't feel cold anymore. I went back to the wall, ready to apologize to Charlie, but to my surprise, he was gone. I figured he'd gone searching for food since it was almost around dinner time, so I waited. I waited until the sky was dark, and I was so cold, my bones ached. I noticed an old man who was playing chess with the pigeons earlier. Charlie had pointed them out, laughing at one particular pigeon who seemed too self-aware. I hurried over to him. "Did you see me earlier?" I twisted around, pointing at the wall the 2 of us sat on. The man nodded. "Oh, you're looking for your friend?" He slid another chess piece across the board. "I believe he walked away with a man a few hours ago." "What man?" I felt like I was going to puke. I described him to the guy, but the old man shrugged. "I have bad eyes, kid. It was just a man. Late 40s, I think." His expression softened when my stomach crawled into my throat. "Are you all right?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sour candy, dropping it into my hand. "You should go home now, kid. I'm sure your parents are worried about you." Again, I asked him to describe this man, this time through my teeth, but the old guy just turned back to his one-man chess game. I think part of me was in denial. I went back to our sleeping spot, expecting Charlie to be there, already comfortable in his sleeping bag, talking about optimistic BS, but he wasn't. I ran back to the shelter with his name choked in my mouth. I was living my own personal nightmare, being snatched into the night and nobody even knowing my name. I just got weird looks, kids looking progressively more freaked out. I wouldn't accept it at first. Charlie could have been anywhere, but the longer I waited for him in all of our spots, it became clear that Charlie was just another missing street kid who was there one minute and gone the next. He was another Ben, another Carly, but this time I made the mistake of getting to know him. He was more than a name. Charlie was my friend. I asked strangers if they had seen him. Passers-by looked me up and down like I was dirt on their shoe. These people had places to be. They didn't care about some faceless kid disappearing from the street. I already knew what they were thinking when they offered pitiful smiles and said things like, "Sorry, I don't know. I can't help you, kid. I'm sure he's out there somewhere." They were wondering why Charlie was sleeping rough in the first place. Why didn't he just get help? I'm going to tell you the hardest thing I've come to realize. It's easy to be numb on the streets, easy to shut down, easy to forget to mourn because it was just too cold. I didn't forget about Charlie, but I did bury him so I wouldn't forget how to survive. So a month later, I thought I was hallucinating when I saw that all too familiar jacket, the one I told them multiple times to keep out of sight. It was snowing again, and it was thick and wet, clinging to my jeans. I was trying to find a patch of concrete free of snow to dump my sleeping bag. I scored hand warmers from one kid who was nice enough to offer them to me for a DS I had found. There he was, somehow. Charlie was standing in the middle of an empty road, in dead of night. I didn't question why or how, I just hugged him, mentally promising myself I would never let him go again. Charlie was so warm. His coat was thicker, and his backpack was nowhere to be seen. "Where'd you go?" I demanded, shoving him back. Charlie just smiled, and I noticed his pocket, an iPhone sticking out. I think I was about to laugh, wondering how he just managed to get an iPhone, when a clammy hand suddenly clamped over my mouth. Warm arms wrapped around my torso and yanked me back. I screamed, but my cries were muffled, the hand clamping tighter until I couldn't breathe. I remember being violently dragged back, my feet stumbling, my body struggling to stay upright. I was dragged halfway down the street, hoisted onto a stranger's shoulders, and dumped into the back of an awaiting van. It didn't feel like it was happening to me. All those nights I had nightmares about being the next kid snatched away. I never thought it would be me. I couldn't even cry out. My body felt paralyzed. I was dragged backwards through snow, and then I was on my knees on the ice-cold flooring of a van, jerking left to right, staring at shutters being pulled down like I was an animal. I dived forward, but I was trapped. "I'm sorry, Finn." Charlie's voice pricked the silence. The back of the van was so cold, and the smell was already there. Potent, a thick, rotting decay. "But you're the perfect body and shape for my father," he said, his voice deadpan and wrong. "I hope this doesn't change things between us," he whispered. His voice was different, taunting and cold, sending shivers down my spine. "We're still friends, right?" I screamed at him. That bastard. He played the role so well, I should have applauded him. I slammed my fist into the shutters, but the ignition came to life, and the van jerked forward, sending me stumbling back. I dropped to my knees, choking on the stink of decay. I didn't want to look. The light was too bright, too invasive, scorching the chill from my skin. I stayed on my knees until the smell got so bad I had to look. In front of me were bodies, most of them faceless with no features, skin already crumbling from bones jutting out. One of them caught my eye, lying at the bottom of the pile. Ben. His skin was gray, dried blood staining his face, painting his clothes. I was already trying to roll him onto his front, so I didn't have to look at him. His eyes were open, like he was still alive. I shoved him onto his stomach, and something sour crawled up my throat, my stomach revolting. I thought I was seeing things, but no. When I reached forward, my fingers touched them. The twisted, feathery appendages protruding from twin slits cruelly sliced into a jutting spine. I shuffled back, a cry clawing from my throat. Wings. They were rotten, decaying, the wings of a bird or something else spliced with his flesh. I could see where his back had been cut open, all the way down his spine. Ben was dead. His wings were dying, festering inside a body that was ice cold and alone, where he would never be found. That thought was quick to hit me, just like me. Carly's short brown curls were buried under another corpse, a much younger kid. I could still see the pale blue of her coat, her yellow hat still frozen to her head. Carly had one singular wing sticking from her back, while the rest of her rotted away. I tripped over something, Carly's backpack. I could glimpse Jason's kicks sticking out from the pile. I couldn't look. They had names. They were real kids. Carly, Ben, Jason. They existed, even if this world was so obsessed with erasing them. Finn? Charlie's whisper slipped through the shutters. I held on to his voice, willing it to be him. Charlie. Do you believe in angels? He asked me once again. He still had that voice, that innocent, chipper tone I fell for. But there was an unmistakable twisting madness clinging to every word. I didn't respond. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. After a while, his voice stopped trying to get my attention. I just sat, freezing cold, my arms around my knees. I was going to die. I kept looking at the kids who vanished, their bodies twisted and contorted in a cruel fantasy. The van stopped when I was falling asleep, jerking me awake. I heard footsteps outside. The shutters slid open, and in front of me, to my surprise, was a middle-aged woman. Her smile was kind, despite the gleam in her eye. She held out her arms, gesturing for me to come toward her. It's okay, honey, she told me. You're okay now. Charlie was standing next to her, his arms folded. Careful, he muttered, nudging her. I saw his lip curl in disgust. Illuminated in the van's headlights, I saw who he really was. A spoiled, psychotic kid playing with his toys. Charlie mockingly stepped back. He might attack you. Behind him stood a towering man, holding a gun, pointing it between my eyes. I had no choice, letting them pull me from the van. The man was quick to slip a shot into the back of my neck, which turned my body to lead. I was lifted into someone's arms. I remember they were warm. The last thing I remember is a bright light getting closer. I don't know how long I was out for, long enough to get an actual, proper sleep. When I opened my eyes, I was staring at the sun peeking through gaps in a wooden door. My head turned at an awkward angle. It looked like I was in some kind of farmhouse. I could see piles of hay and horse crap in the corner. I was lying on my stomach, wrists pinned down. The pain crept in slowly. At first a dull thud, before slamming into me, agonizing lightning bolts striking down my spine. So intensely painful. My vision blurred and feathered, losing focus. I've had sensory issues since I was a kid, and I could feel the entirety of my upper back had been split open. I could feel my own blood dripping down my skin, and something cruel and sharp forcing flaps of flesh apart. The thought of being cut open was enough to send me into hysteria. I remember screaming until my throat was raw, until I passed out again. This time, it was a mercy. The pain wouldn't leave, pulling me into agony, and then letting me go. When I came around for the second time, I felt the ice-cold scalpel slicing into my back, but I didn't feel like I was cut open anymore. I felt a painful tugging when I tried to move, stitches holding me together. That's all finished, the man's voice sounded. The body is almost ready. But when? That voice sent shivers creeping down my spine. Charlie. You said that last time, and the last 3 angels died, Dad. I could sense his rolled eyes. Admit that you're just killing them, and you have no idea what you're doing. I said he's ready, the man grumbled. So let him fly. Charlie groaned. Come on, Dad. I want to see the angel fly. I was aware I was gasping into cold surface of the surgical table. His stitches are still fresh, the man said. When he's ready, you can play with him. I was left alone after that. Hours, then a full day, but I wasn't hungry anymore. I wasn't thirsty. I didn't sleep. I was trying to find the best position to lie on my side, when footsteps startled me. "Hey, Finn." Charlie's voice was an excited whisper. I felt his warm fingers tiptoe down my back before reaching for my restraints. He pulled them apart, helping me up, and I immediately dragged my hand down my back, where I was sure I'd touched my ugly, protruding spine, but instead I felt smooth skin. Slowly, I lowered myself off the table. Charlie was holding my backpack. "Here," he said excitedly, shoving it into my chest. "Dad says I'm not allowed to let you go yet, but I'm too impatient." His eyes never left my back. Without responding, I took my backpack, shoved past him, and broke into a sprint. I pushed through the doors of the farmhouse and kept running. I expected to be grabbed and pulled back, but I wasn't. Charlie just stood there watching me, grinning, an inhuman grin stretched across his face. I didn't stop until I couldn't breathe, until I was on my knees, on some unfamiliar road in the middle of nowhere. I was picked up by a woman who offered to take me to the sheriff's station. She gave me hot tea and food, but I declined both. I wasn't hungry, and my body didn't feel like my own. When we got into town, I was sure I knew where I was. I dived out of her car. I went to the restroom, pulled off my shirt, and ran my fingers down my back. I could feel them. Something was moving under my skin, twitching, like they were alive. When I gingerly touched my skin, I could feel tiny stitches all the way down my spine. Part of me wondered what would happen if I ripped them open. After a single restless night on the street, I realized I couldn't do it anymore. I ended up asking for help when the pain in my back kept me up at night. I could feel them physically trying to push through my skin, straining against my spine. I couldn't sleep on my back or my side. The best sleeping position was lying on my stomach. Winter moved into spring, and I felt like I was dying. I couldn't eat, and I was weak. I think it was luck, maybe a miracle. I walked into one of my old teachers, Miss W. She didn't ask about my situation, but she did offer a place to stay. That was the best thing about Miss W. No matter how much I knew she wanted to ask, she never invaded my privacy. She saw the scars on my back, she saw me puke up everything I ate, but she didn't speak. Miss W asked me if I wanted to share anything with her, and I said no. If anyone knew what was inside my back, I'd be sliced open again. I was 19 at this point, and I was tired and in too much pain to care about accepting handouts. Miss W let me sleep in her spare room. She offered me food, but I could never eat it. I could only drink water, and even that was hard to stomach. She took me to the emergency room to get my back checked out, but after I suffered a panic attack at the thought of opening up to a doctor, she promised no hospitals. The pain got worse. It laughed at medication. It got so bad one night, I stood on the roof of Miss W's house and let the pain take over, ripping through me until something was splitting my spine, sending me to my knees. I could feel them coming through, breaking through my skin. They felt wrong and awkward, like additional limbs. I panicked and with shaking hands, forced the twitching things back into twin slits. That did relieve the pain. I still couldn't eat or drink, but I started to feel human again. Miss W offered to send me back to school, and I did. I went back to finish high school. The eating, drinking thing got easier. I think my body just got used to it. After school, I got into community college, and Miss W helped me buy my first place. I grew up with the gnawing feeling that something wasn't right with me. The pain was still agonizing at times, and I would have to rip the stitches open and let them free sometimes. I've never once tried to figure them out because I'm terrified of them. I'm 29 now. I live far away from my hometown. I have a boyfriend and an apartment, and I finally feel human again. Last night, I was waiting for a train home. I was freezing, and already I could feel my back twitching, pain starting to gnaw at me. It's worse these days. Not just the pain. I'm sleepwalking. I'll find myself blocks away from my house, with no recollection of how I got there. I don't know why I'm no different from my teenage self. I still don't want to ask for help, because whatever is inside me isn't human. So I kept my mouth shut. There was a homeless girl slumped in the corner of the platform. I've made it my goal. Whenever I see a homeless kid, I point them to the nearest shelter, and when they roll their eyes at me, I offer to take them there myself. I don't leave them until I know these kids are safe. Yes, they can be difficult. They're a lot more vocal these days. Kids hate authority figures, especially authority figures that failed them. But I want to make it clear to them that they can ask for them, and there is help. I was already halfway across the platform when I glimpsed familiar brown curls nestled under a green beanie. I knew it was him. He was wearing that exact same jacket, clinging to a wider frame. He was taller, his face more matured, with a 5 o'clock shadow, talking loudly on an expensive phone. I took my eyes off the girl for 1 second. 1 second. I turned back to her, and she was gone. Just like that. When I searched the crowd, I caught her blonde ponytail behind her. A man pulling her through strangers. I started forward when someone pulled me back. No, Finn. Charlie's voice was in my ear suddenly. She has the perfect shape and body for my father, he murmured. His voice kept me paralyzed, while the girl was getting further and further away, before becoming a speck and then bleeding into nothing. I want to see you fly, Finn, Charlie whispered. I twisted around and he was gone. When I left the train station, sitting on a bench was his old threaded backpack. Nothing inside, but I know why he left it. He's telling me he's watching me. Charlie is bragging that he's taking more kids right in front of me. I've looked everywhere for the girl, and I can't find her. When I asked a group of street kids, they were defensive, clearly not trusting me, before I warned them that someone was kidnapping them. They told me 3 guys and a girl, the blonde, have all vanished. I asked when, and that's when they started getting suspicious. They left without telling me, and I've spent the last week looking for these kids. The only way I'm going to find these kids is to find the sick bastard who took me, before he does to them what he did to Ben, Carly, and Jason, and me. Trash Tia, always killing it with these stories, man. To be such a damaged kid and be living on the streets, and then finally find someone you feel like you can trust, and then they end up taking you home to have you mutilated by their father. What a twist. Gosh, I hope you guys enjoyed that one. I know I definitely did. And man, do I hope there's a part 2. The next story is from r/NoSleep from user HorrorJunkie123. Growing up, my grandparents had one rule: don't look in Pappy's private room. When I was 16, I was sent to live with my grandparents for a month. I hadn't been there in years, but I had strained relationships with my parents, and they thought a visit to the middle of nowhere would somehow ease the tension between us. Really, I think they just wanted to get away from me. Whatever the case, that trip to the countryside changed my life forever, in worse ways than I ever imagined. "Bye, sweetie, behave," my mother said, waving out the window as her SUV kicked up a trail of dust. "Try to contain your excitement a little, geez," I mumbled, turning to my smiling parents. "Oh, Stephen, we're so happy that you're staying with us," Grandma said, beaming at me. Her warmth was infectious. Pappy didn't say anything at first. He just clasped a meaty hand onto my shoulder. "She's right. We don't get many visitors." I grinned at him, even though internally I was screaming. "Happy to be here," I replied, praying that my facade would hold. "Come on," Grandma said, ushering me inside. "I'll show you to your room." The moment my grandmother left me alone, I whipped out my cell phone. To my horror, I discovered that I had no service. My grandparents were old school. They didn't have Wi-Fi, every teenager's worst nightmare. "Hey, Pap," I said as I clopped down the stairs. He glanced up at me from his crossword, indicating for me to speak. My grandfather wasn't the most social man. He had a stern, no-nonsense demeanor, and he had the build to match the intimidating aura. A little part of me was always a bit afraid of him. Suddenly, my question felt absurdly stupid. Do you have internet out here?" He eyed me for a moment, before nodding to a dinosaur of a monitor. "That's all we got. No internet connection to it, though." My heart dropped. I had a feeling that it was going to be a long summer. 2 days later, I found myself exploring the basement. It was the least inviting part of the house, poorly lit with cobwebs everywhere and a thick layer of dust coated everything in sight. Probably not the safest place to be, but I was bored with nothing better to do. As I pulled the switch to the single light bulb dangling from the ceiling, something immediately drew my attention. A door. A single wooden door at the far end of the basement. To my surprise, there was a note nailed to it. Stay out. Pappy. I feel like that's a pretty direct note. It was obviously intended for me. The message immediately spiked my curiosity. I made my way over to it, tiptoeing across the dirt floor. It felt like I was doing something illegal, like I was about to take a leap that I couldn't take back, and that feeling was exhilarating. Once I reached my destination, my heart pounded in my throat. I took a deep breath as I reached for the knob. A boost of adrenaline surged through me as I twisted and locked. I should have known. I turned to leave and cause mischief elsewhere. The excitement of the situation deflated. The second I did, I stopped in my tracks. Someone was blocking my path. The color drained from my face as I realized who it was. My grandfather. What are you doing down here? It wasn't a question. I was just looking around, I said, flashing him a weak smile. Pappy glowered down at me, his hulking frame looming overhead like a shadow. He stood there in silence for a moment before he spoke. Get out. I don't want to see you down here again. Yes, sir. He didn't have to tell me twice. I swerved around him and bolted back up the stairs, his burning scowl following me the entire way. Side note, I feel like this is the person that survives in the Scary Movie. Like, he's like, yeah, get out. Don't come down here again. They're like, yeah, sure. You got it. I'm done. Honestly, they could just end the story there, right? I had to know what was behind that door. Pappy was obviously hiding something that he didn't want me to see. I couldn't go back down there so soon after being caught, though. No, I definitely couldn't take that risk. I decided to wait until he was out at the store to make my move. Little did I know, an opportunity would present itself sooner than I expected. That same night, I awoke at an odd hour with the sudden urge to pee. I groggily slipped out of bed, did my business, and headed for the kitchen for a glass of water. Once I was satisfied, I crept back to my room, careful not to wake Pappy and Grandma. And that's when I heard it. I had just reached the top of the landing when a low rustling emerged from somewhere deeper in the house. I don't know why I didn't go back to bed, but for some reason, I sat on my haunches at the top of the landing, invisible in the darkness. Footsteps clunked along the floor, and the shadow of my grandfather's towering frame came into view. He paused in the kitchen, as if he could sense my presence. For a moment, I thought he'd caught me, but to my relief, he eventually continued on his path. My brows furrowed. What was he doing down there? Being the nosy teenager I was, I had to find out. My heart dropped when I heard a door creak open. The basement. He must have been going into his secret room. I descended the stairs as quietly as I could, blood pounding in my ears like thunder. When I reached the bottom, my eyes immediately fell to the open basement door. I scampered down the second set of steps, careful to avoid any noisy floorboards. I froze halfway and watched. Pappy was standing there on the opposite side of the room. He rummaged around behind an old dusty painting resting against the wall, before producing a rusted key. He inserted it into the lock, and the space was illuminated with light. At that moment, my heart nearly exploded. I didn't know for certain, but I could have sworn that I saw crimson splattered on the floor. Curiosity gnawed at me like a piranha. I had to know what was in that room. I knew where Pappy was hiding the key, but I was too paranoid to check at night. He'd gotten the drop on me the last time. I didn't want to find out what would happen if he caught me again. As much as it pained me to do it, I went along with my original plan. I waited until Pappy went to the store to make my move. Going to get milk, be back soon, he grumbled to Grandma as he snatched his keys from the hook. Okay, be safe, she said, returning to the pie that she was preparing in the kitchen. That was my golden opportunity. I put down the newspaper that I'd been reading and opened the door to the basement as quietly as I could. My heart pounded with each tiny creak. Fortunately for me, Grandma's hearing wasn't the best, and she didn't pick up on anything out of the ordinary. I practically flew down the stairs. I was itching to know what was inside that room. I leaned the painting forward and retrieved the key, turning to the door. The sign that Pappy had made was still there, looming over me like a sentry. My hand trembled as I placed the key in the lock and turned. This was it. Nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to witness. Dried blood caked the floor. A metal work table sat to my right with a wide array of tools. Pliers, hacksaws, hammers. their blades crusted in flaky crimson. At the far end of the room, I saw a corkboard. Dozens of newspaper articles and pictures of missing people were pinned to it. And to my left, that was what nearly made me pass out then and there. A yellow, dingy mattress sat in the corner. On top of it lay a corpse, maggots writhing in and out of every emaciated orifice. Its eyes were wide open, and its mouth had stiffened into a permanent scream. I took a step back as the putrid stench assaulted my nose, but just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, a sound from behind me made me freeze. Click. I slowly turned to find my grandfather standing there, a six-shooter trained on me. "Pappy, I thought you were at the store," I squeaked, my voice weak and brittle. "Forgot my wallet." He scowled at me, delivering the most hateful glare I've ever seen in my life. He sighed, breaking the silence permeating between us. "You've seen too much, boy. I didn't want it to come to this, but you've left me no choice." Pow! A deafening gunshot ripped through the air. For a moment, I didn't feel a thing. The adrenaline surging through my system made sure of that, but when I looked down, I came to the sickening realization that my arm was blossoming with red. "Arnold, what was that?" Grandma shouted from upstairs. "Nothing, ignore it." To my shock, she didn't reply. How much did she know? "Your grandmother's going to be upset when she finds out," Pappy said, this time raising the gun to my head and cocking the hammer. "But she'll get over it, eventually." I didn't give him the satisfaction. I couldn't. My fight-or-flight response kicked in at just the right time. I bolted forward, the sound of the bullet whizzing past my temple ringing in my ear as I went. I shoved my grandfather and he stumbled, dropping the gun. I didn't stop. I leapt up the stairs, darted into the foyer, and swiped Pappy's spare set of keys from the hook. I heard his pounding footsteps pursuing me as I made a mad dash for his truck. "Get back here!" The sound of his voice booming from the depths of the basement only made me run faster. I crashed outside, unlocked the truck, and threw myself in the driver's seat. Pappy appeared in the doorway as I threw the vehicle into drive. Crash! I instinctively ducked my head as the left side mirror shattered. Pappy didn't try to shoot me again. He stood there, that awful glare burning a hole into my head as I floored it down the dirt road and far away from that house. I kept driving until I reached the nearest town. Fortunately, the bullet had only grazed me, so I wasn't in need of immediate medical attention. The police investigated my grandparents' house. What they found haunts me to this day. The bodies of my grandparents were recovered from the home. The gun was still warm in Pappy's hand when they found him. After a thorough investigation, my grandfather's crimes were made public. Aside from him and my grandmother, he was linked to the disappearances of 13 people, and it's thought that he could have had more victims. I had to attend therapy for years afterward just to feel normal again. Now, all this time later, I'm just thankful that I made it out of that house alive. You know, I had originally said that this person would definitely survive in a horror movie, but at the same time, they shouldn't have gone in the door. I mean, they're a teenager. What else can you expect? Anyways, let me know down in the comments, what would you do if you found out that a relative of yours was a serial killer and you found their murder room? The next story today is also from r/scary stories from user Donovan221. I sold my soul to the devil. She only gets it once a year. Listen, I know the magnitude of the mistake I've made. You don't have to remind me. But I mean, at least let me explain myself. She was just so gosh darn cute. Her pretty blonde pigtails, the adorable little lemonade stand that she had set up all by herself. I just couldn't resist her charm. I should have known something was up when she slid me that contract, because, duh, right? But man, the way she did it, she had this whimsical, childish look in her eye, the kind that could melt the heart of even the most hardened criminal. "Hey, mister, you want to partner up? I could sure use the help," she inquired, wiping sweat from her brow cartoonishly. I replied joyously with "And what might you need help with, you little entrepreneur?" She beamed with excitement at my compliment, and her eyes shone and glistened in the sun. "It's simple, mister. All you gotta do is help me, once a year," she exclaimed, raising a finger up to my face to emphasize her words. "Once a year, huh? This seems more like an all-summer operation." She giggled and hid her face behind her hands before responding. No, silly, I'll just need your help one time a year. I've been trying to find people all day, but no one takes me seriously, she pouted, crossing her arms and furrowing her brow. This shattered my heart. She just seemed so wounded, so hurt that no one wanted to help her make a few extra dollars. So all I have to do is come out here once a year and do what? It's simple, mister. All you gotta do is come on by and purchase a lemonade. Mom tells me it's an investment opportunity. Glancing down at my watch, I realized that I was beginning to run a little late to work. Not wanting to upset the little girl, I threw her a bone. All right, sweetie, I'll bite. I'll come out here every year and make sure to ask for a lemonade from you personally. How's that sound? She glowed with excitement, and I took pleasure in knowing that I had made her day just a little better, even if it was just by a tiny bit. And with that, I raised my lemonade to her and tipped my hat as a farewell. As I turned to walk away, however, I heard her sweet voice call out from behind me. Wait, mister, you forgot the contract. Wow, I thought to myself, she sure is taking this whole thing seriously. In a bit of a hurry at this point, I quickly turned around and waltzed back to her lemonade stand, where she stood, pen in hand and pigtails flowing gently in the summer breeze. Of course, how could I forget? I said, putting on the most professional voice I could muster. Without even looking at the contract, I pressed the pen right against the dotted line where her little index finger pointed. I signed my name, and without warning, the girl snatched the paper. She stuffed it within the pocket of her overalls before beginning to laugh. It started out childish and sweet, happy even, but it grew into something demonic, something hardly human. Her head twitched as her body rocked back and forth like a metronome. Her laughter seemed as though it was all I could hear, and the world around me seemed to be growing dark. The noise grated my eardrums, and I felt as though they would burst at any moment. The girl's eyes were now pitch black, burning with a kind of ferocity that is only seen within Holy Scripture. I felt nausea and dizziness begin to overcome me, and before I knew it, my vision was swimming. The last thing I remembered was my body smashing hard against the grass in front of the girl's home. Then darkness. I awoke in bed, my own bed. I had no memory of returning home, yet my room was spotless and my bed had been made with precise care. I, however, was covered head to toe in dark red mud that caked my arms and legs. My fingertips had been stained black, and a gash had been carved from my abdomen all the way up to my neck, before being stitched up crudely. What really tormented me, however, was the overpowering taste of pennies that was still present in my mouth. I had a headache from hell, and my entire body throbbed in pain. Looking in the mirror, it looked as though I had aged 5 years, seemingly overnight. My hair was matted, my facial hair had grown to a feral extent, and my mouth seemed to be stained with gore. Amidst my panic, I noticed that the television had been left on, and that the channel had been set to a breaking news report. Arson reported at a neighborhood home in Gainesville, suspect still at large. I looked down at my fingertips, and the pieces fell directly into place. I noticed that house from the news report. I recognized that lawn, and I knew exactly who had been running that little lemonade stand that sat like a beacon within the front yard. My head throbbed harder, and I felt like I'd thrown up. What finally pushed me over the edge and had me curled into the fetal position at the edge of my dresser was a note that I had neglected to notice earlier, too distraught by my reflection. A note that simply read, "See you next year." I guess the moral of this story is always read contracts before you sign them, especially now, if it's from a little girl that's running a lemonade stand. You got to be careful with this stuff. The next story is also from Donovan221. I think my son is a serial killer. I tried my best. I really tried. I didn't want parenthood, but when it's given to you, hell, it's not hard to fall in love with it. It has its ups and downs, sure, but through it all, you learn to love your child. They're an extension of you, a part of yourself that you can try and mold into an even better version. Unfortunately, people aren't as clean cut as that. You tell them to zig and they zag. It's just how life is. Beyond the disagreements and head bumping, though, it's still possible to raise a kid. Bring them up right in the world. That's what I thought I was doing. My son was well-mannered, a gentleman, and God, did he have his way with the ladies. Once high school started, it seemed like every other week he was telling me all about his new love, or how he was sure this was the one. He was only 15, but who was I to cast doubt on whatever love life he found for himself? Plus, it all stayed at school, having those cafeteria dates and what have you. However, by 17, he was actually bringing girls over to meet us, having dinner with his mom and I. Now, I'm not the best with names, but I do remember faces quite well. That's why, when I started noticing the missing person flyers, I was quick to cock an eyebrow. But this is my son we're talking about, the boy who I'd raised since I was a child myself. I was 16 when he was born, and I worked my ass off for him. We grew up together. I couldn't convince myself that everything was peachy forever, though, and by the time I saw Miranda's name on one of those flyers, the most recent girl he had brought home, I knew that I had to talk to him. I needed to set things straight, give some relief to my suspicion. I begged God, prayed like a madman that I was wrong, but the more I thought, the more I started connecting the dots. I'd never had one of these girls visit more than once or twice. I'd already caught my son sneaking out at night on multiple occasions. He seemed to always have those hollow eyes whenever he interacted with any of them. When he talked about them, though, it was different. It was like he was truly excited, but not in that normal teenage boy kind of way. It was like, when he talked to me about them, he was fantasizing, thinking about what he wanted to do to them. When I finally got home after a long day at the office, I practically sprinted up the stairs to my son's room to inquire. To my disappointment, the room was empty and my son was nowhere to be seen. What I did find, though, were missing person flyers, folded neatly on his nightstand, each one depicting a different ex-girlfriend. Now, if it had just been the flyers themselves, I'd have been able to explain it away. Maybe he was helping to hang them up. Maybe he just had to run out to finish and had forgotten to grab them. No, life can never be that easy. What made me realize that I needed to do more than just talk to my son was what he had been writing on the flyers. Scrawled across each flyer in the handwriting that I helped my boy practice were the complaints. Too loud, too demanding, too arrogant, too annoying. I sifted through the papers, and by the end had read a total of 7 complaints. A tear fell down my face, streaming down the cheek, dipping into my newly discovered smile. I must have been in a trance because I didn't even hear the bedroom door open. All I remember is that faint, quiet, "Dad?" before I turned to greet my son. Emotion overwhelmed me, and all I could think to say as I outstretched my arms for a hug was, "That's my boy." All right, yeah, I didn't really expect that ending. Like father, like son, I guess. Anyways, that's all the scary Reddit stories and Minecraft I have for you today. If you liked today's video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. If you didn't, hopefully you'll like tomorrow's video because I upload every day. Huge shout out to my channel members. If you do want to further support the channel, that link's going to be down in the description. As always, this is completely optional and don't feel like you need to do this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.